Okay, we are going to go to guest number 2. Guest number 2 is Dr. Patti Conklin. Patti was with us here back in July of last year. She is Patti is boy, my glasses are all fogged up tonight. I need to get some new glasses or clean them maybe. You know what? I'm just going to bring Patti on and let her talk because she's been on the show. She's so cool to have. Patti, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm going to, after we're done, I'm going to go back and listen to your first guest. Goodness, she sounds great. But I'm doing fantastic here in Georgia. Yeah.
16 years old, Patti. And she's already involved with NASA. She has a mentor, an Italian astronaut that's mentoring her. She's been to Kazakhstan for a launch. Talk about having her act together.
Yeah, I was watching your energy as you were talking about her and seeing her and just phenomenal. Yeah.
Makes me really feel old.
I know, 16. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
good for her.
16.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been, it was last July we had you on the show. It's an honor to have you back. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of the backstory? Tell us a little bit about yourself. I need to get my glasses clean. I can barely read my laptop here.
That's okay. I'll give you a break here for a second.
Go ahead.
So I'm classified as a medical intuitive and have had my sight since birth. And I really didn't realize that I was different in how I saw the world. I'm not psychic. I can't tell you the future. I can't tell you the lottery numbers.
Oh, I need that.
I do too. But when I look at a human being, I see particles and not flesh. And I was very isolated as a child, so I never knew that people didn't see that way until really my early 20s, and was tested at 28 and found that I had a genius IQ, but that my brain wave was incredibly fast, and it put me more on like a human MRI. So my sight throughout my lifetime was, if you're watching television and the cable goes out, you get snow, and that's the way I see the world. So, I just dealt with life. I could tell you something was green, but I could never tell you the shade of green.
Right.
So I doubled up my junior and senior year and graduated when I was 16, and took off on the adventures of the world and worked in nonprofit for 20 years and 20 plus years, and have been doing this work for the last 20 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Now your book, and I did get a chance, I'm not going to lie and say I read it from cover to cover, but I did page it. I did page through quite a bit of it. Your book is called God Within, The Day God's Train Stopped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where'd you come up with that title?
I actually wrote the book 16 years ago and felt like it wasn't time to release it. But when I was 7, I had what I considered to be a visitation from Source, Creator, aliens, I don't know, but something. And was told 3 things: that 38 to 42 would be my greatest growth years, that 42 to 62 would be my greatest contribution to humanity, and that I could come home then if I wanted, but that the purpose of my walk was to teach people to become insubstantial without transitioning. And so right before my 38th birthday, I had a dream. And Jesus and Mother Mary were there, and they're not usually people that I equate to much, but I was on a train. And the train was moving along, and all of a sudden it stopped, and I turned around, and there was Jesus and Mother Mary. And this was all in my dream, and Jesus looked at me and he said, "We're giving you a choice. The train is off the tracks. You can get off the train now and live your life, or we're going to put the train back on the track and you'll spend the rest of your life in service." And it was a very serious question, and I said, put the train back on the tracks. I'll be of service. And the train started moving again. And about a week later, I had another visitation, and I was told to move my family. At that time, I was director of Canine Companions for Independence of the Southeast region in Florida, and was told to take my family and move to Hartwell, Georgia, and so we began walking the path I'd been asked to walk at the age of 7. And within a month, we were moved.
Wow.
and doing it ever since.
You mentioned, let's just back up a little bit if we can.
Sure.
And I think we discussed this the last time you were on the show. I'm going through my notes from back then. I can't believe July 19th. It's hard to believe. Seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
That I would assume I would believe you would agree that we're made up of energy, of that spark that makes you, me, and everybody else. Mm-hmm. When you had this visitation, do you believe that it was Jesus and Mother Mary, or do you believe that it was something that you could understand? That's the one question I had. One of the questions I had for you. People talk about, especially even in near-death experiences, something familiar, something they're aware of visits them. Do you think that, in the scheme of things, maybe I'm going a little bit out on the edge here, but we're introduced to people or beings or what have you that we can relate to and we can understand? Because this is a deep subject.
Yeah, I think you're totally on track. I think you're totally on track. I mean, the reality for my world is everything is particles. So, when I'm flying at 30,000 feet in the airplane, I know that the airplane doesn't exist, but it gives my mind a frame of reference in order to understand how I'm traveling. And people have asked me, why did you hear a male voice when you were 7 years old? And I said, I think that you hear the voice of what you'll trust the most. And at that time in my life, my mother was very frightened of me and, in fact, didn't even allow me to speak in the house. I had to put everything in writing to her.
Really?
Yeah. She was just, she'd been terrified of me since the time I was 3. And so by the time I was 7, I had to do everything in writing. So even my old report cards, say, oh, Patty's such a great kid, good learner, but, man, she never stops talking. It's like, yeah, because it's the only place I can talk. But I think you get that frame of reference, and I think you're absolutely true. I mean, when I had my first visitation at the age of 7, I walked myself to the nearest church, which was 1.5 miles up the road. And so certainly I learned about Jesus and Mother Mary, but I didn't have a reference. And when I have visitations from what I call Father, it's just a white mist. So I think the particles form in accordance to what you understand personally. And I think that it's where people start to get frustrated because they want to see the way I see, or they want to see the way that, some other person sees, or they want to hear, they want to feel. And it's like, no, you're going to perceive those particles according to what you can understand. Right. I think you're right. You're spot on.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guest for this hour is Dr. Patti Conklin. Patti, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your work with us.
Thank you for having me, Pat.
So let's talk a little bit about the divine spark. Is that where it all starts?
I think it's where it all starts. I mean, whether we believe the quantum physics theory or the religious theory or the spiritual theory, it really starts with the divine spark. And I've never trained with anyone, so everything that I say is just my opinion.
So it's got to be right.
But my opinion, my observations of sitting and watching life. But I think that in the beginning, the universe and galaxies and infinite areas were frequency. Were just sound waves that eventually became evolved to the point of consciousness, which some people would call creator or God or source or whatever. And I think that at one point, billions and quadrillions of sparks broke off from that being and became individual souls. And so the divine spark for me, and most people don't, they don't talk about it very much, and so many people aren't aware of it. They're aware of their soul, but they're not aware of the divine spark. And when I look at anyone, it doesn't matter where, but I see 5 layers in their heart center. So right on top of the sternum is an energy field, a circular energy field, and right below that is your immune system and what I would call the subtle energy field, the energy field that we came to this planet in essence of being with. Beyond that is the soul, and it's the consciousness, and people think that, all they need to do is connect to the soul. But beyond the soul is the tunnel, and the tunnel is everything you fear and everything you hate about yourself. And beyond that is the true spark of the divine, and that is the original spark of the universe. So I always encourage people, go beyond the soul, face your fears, face what you hate, face what you're in judgment about, because the more you can balance soul and tunnel, which are equal pieces, the more you can work towards the true origin of the divine spark.
It's so complex, and then yet sometimes it seems like it's so simple. Mm-hmm. I think that we all have that desire to know where we came from, and then we meet people like you that have these special gifts that kind of help us along the way.
I think that for me at least, being isolated as a child, having parents that were so frightened of me, left me to my internal knowingness. And I think it's so simple, and I think we make it very complex. I remember, when I first started in this field 20 years ago, it'll be 20 years in June, people were talking about bringing in universal energy, through their crown chakra and through the top of their head. And I just remembered looking at them going, why on earth would you do that? You have the purest form inside of you. Why would you ever work from someplace else? So, my questioning what was already out there made me observe even more and become more firm in my belief of what truly is taking place. And, right or wrong, it's just the opinion and the theory, but we make it too complex, Pat. We really do. It's pretty simple.
Did your parents, you're talking about your mom being scared of you, did she think you were the Antichrist or something?
Well, my parents were addicts and alcoholics, and so they really had no other interest other than those two things. Right. But when I was 3 years old, I walked into the kitchen. This is my earliest memory. But I walked into the kitchen, and my mother was sitting there having coffee with one of her closest friends, and I went in there, and I was 3 years old, and I looked at my mother's friend, and I literally saw a sperm go into an egg. And I knew that was a sperm, and that was an egg, and she had just conceived a baby, just in that instant. And I started jumping up and down, and I'm like, oh, you're going to have a baby! And, they're laughing, and she finally stops laughing, the friend, and she looks at me, and she said, no, I'm not. And the particle shifted within her body, and I just, because I was only 3 years old, I said, you're going to die when the baby's born. And my mother backhanded me so hard, she knocked me through the kitchen wall into the living room. And I remember just, standing up, covered in blood and plaster, and just looking at her going, what did I say? And 9 months later, her best friend died in childbirth.
Wow.
And so for me, from that moment, I think we're all gifted at the same levels. I really do. I don't think that any of us are more accelerated. I think we all have the same gifts. But most of us are pre-programmed out, I would say. The majority of people, parents say, that's not there, you're not seeing that, and kids believe it. For me, I knew my parents were wrong. As soon as she died, I knew that what I was seeing in my world was truth, and whatever they were seeing wasn't. And so when I left home at the age of 12, I left home because I understood that I was beyond their comprehension to understand me, and the not being able to speak or share or anything really kind of moved me out and made me realize that I wanted to explore myself. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s and having a great conversation with Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan was just like, you are not normal. This is not a normal way to see the world. And I'm like, of course it is. He's like, of course it isn't. So we'd get together and have drinks and just argue adamantly. And he really was the one that eventually pushed me into getting tested to find out why I was seeing what I was seeing, because I knew I wasn't crazy. I'm very analytical and very linear, and things have to make sense to me. But I always tell people, we all have the same level of intuition, but most of us sit and think about it as to whether or not we should do it. And I always say, go for it. Then you can sit and study and decide whether or not, why you did what you did. And because there's not a wrong journey that we can take.
Okay, let me ask you two. I'm going to go really deep here, Patti.
Okay.
All right. You talked about how you mentioned about how people, which I totally agree in, the children have gifts or abilities. Things surface at a very young age, and I think it's just I don't want to call it human intuition, but it's just what somebody thinks is good parenting when they stifle kids. Little kids talk about my imaginary friend Billy or my imaginary friend Mary or whatever, and the parents just say shut your mouth. People are going to think you're crazy. You don't need to talk about stuff like that. Do you believe, this is a couple-part question, do you believe that when you, through, I don't want to say evolution, but do you believe that through generations in families, through conception and birth, that stifling kind of continues on from way back when? The second part of the question is, considering that your parents, this is deep, considering that your parents had the issues that they had when you were born, do you think that maybe some of those inhibitions were lifted? Do you think that maybe, to be kind here, their state of mind gave you something different?
Oh, I think I'll take second question first. I totally think it did. I think that without, because I didn't have their interference. And so I was able to observe the world, and with a 168 IQ, I could figure things out fairly quickly. And so their inability to connect with me kept them out of my way. And you hear it all the time. People go, well, I really believe that I have a capability, but my parents are going to think I'm crazy, or my family's going to think I'm crazy. I seriously never had to, for 1 second, deal with that question. So it did lift a lot of imposed beliefs from me because we never bonded. My mother died 3 years ago, actually almost 4 years ago now. And, 3 days before she died, I called her. I had put her in hospice. I hadn't seen her for about 15 years. And I had gone home and saw what was going on in her body and knew she was dying and got her in hospice. And I called her and I said, how's the morning going? And she's like, good. And I said, you're having a good day. And she's like, yeah, but I want to say something to you. And I said, what? And she said, I hate you. And I don't know why I hate you, but I have always hated you. And I just smiled to myself. And I said, I'm so proud of you. That is the first honest thing that you have ever said to me. And I'm proud of you. I mean, for me, that tells me your soul has really advanced and that you were able to articulate it. And she said, well, I don't feel good about it because I really love the other kids. And I'm like, I know you did. But your inability to like me or love me allowed me to listen to my own source. I had to depend on me. And I would not be the teacher that I am today had it played out any differently. And I tell people that. I sit and think about my parents being on the other side, getting ready to come in, and them saying, source, whatever, saying to my parents, hey, this is your next gig. You're going to go in and have 4 kids, and you are going to hate one and isolate one to the extent that the only voice you will ever trust is mine. My parents did their job. What could I ever be upset with them about? We had nothing in common. But I think that people need to understand that how your upbringing is going to limit you or take the limits away, and you as an adult have that ability to look at that as a gift.
Right.
I also think in part 1, we're seeing a lot more of genetic memory coming through. And in my world, we store everything we say within ourselves. And so we're seeing this genetic memory coming through. And so I do think that if you're in a fearful state and that's being passed down generationally, that it can cap at birth. But I think that as children get into that, especially age 2, 3, they really start to become aware that they're separate from their parents. And they begin on their own. Source is still, the divine spark is still very active in the human body, and they start seeing. And I look at it this way. The thymus gland is what your heart center sits on. You've got your sternum, you've got your thymus gland, and you've got the heart center on top of that. I truly believe that the thymus is the one physical piece to source. And when we're born, our thymus is fully activated. But by the time we reach puberty, our thymus is atrophied in most people. And I think the reason that is because we do get cut off from source. We are told that we're wrong, or that we don't see anything, or that your imaginary friend isn't there. All of that. And that separates and shuts down the thymus, and you lose your connection to source.
Interesting. You want to take a call?
Sure.
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. We're on with Patti Conklin.
Hey, pal. How you?
Hey, Harv. What's going on, brother?
Man, she's great. She's talking about what Larry was talking about.
Yeah.
About cellular memory, and you can reprogram it. But not to mention the fact. Sorry, Patti. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I totally agree. I think cellular memory is there, and I now have 4 grandchildren. One was just born 2 weeks ago, and I look in their eyes to see what gifts they've carried on from me, and it's amazing.
Dog.
Pardon?
You said,
well, you're blessed.
You're blessed, yeah. I just had 2 weeks ago. Actually, it's 3 weeks ago. Monday, I just had a granddaughter.
I just had a granddaughter 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, Sierra Kate.
Yep.
Well, I'm so old that my grandkids are having grandkids. Gee, I stopped buying presents. I just said, if you can get up to my house, I'll give you $20. The door never stops knocking. Anyway.
Yep.
Hey, sis, did you read Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot? When in one of his chapters he was talking about how doctors diagnose when a patient walks in?
I personally have never read anything. I've never read a book by someone else. I don't even read books that have been written about me.
Right.
But I do think that doctors have the capability, and they're getting much better at it, actually.
Yeah, I asked my primary care physician. I'm not going to throw his name out, although I probably should because he's really cool. I walked in, he's like, okay, so here's the thing. And I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, you guys took my blood pressure. What's the thing? He said, here's the thing. And I said, here's a copy of Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. Read it. Because I have total respect for you. I've given out maybe 20 copies, I guess.
I'll have to read that one.
Yeah, you might as well. I mean, it's really great. And what she's talking about is what I was studying with a gal 20 years ago when she was talking about all these things. We were looking at all these things. It was one thing after another. When you open yourself up for it, it's never ending.
Right.
I mean, it's incredibly replete with.
Yep. Yeah, and you just have to be able to step forward and do it. Hey, we got to take a quick commercial break. Thanks.
I got too scared to stay with it.
All right. Hang in there, brother. Thanks for calling.
Thanks, pal.
Bye-bye. Welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight, Dr. Patti Conklin. Again, Patti, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm having a great time.
Let's talk a little bit, if it's okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to comment on before we move forward?
No, just congratulations on the granddaughter.
Yeah, I know. Boy, my back hurts now. No, it's amazing. It's she's been on the earth for I think we're going into week 3 already. Time flies so quick, and she's doing just great.
Yeah, mine is Sky Marie, and she's been on the earth now for 2 weeks, and boy, she just changes every day.
Yeah, she does. Her look changes every day, and you can tell that she's learning and absorbing and everything. It's so much fun. I know my wife Carol has been spending a ton of time with her. I need to get over there and spend more time, but she's really changing quickly. Let's talk about first of all, a couple things. Let's talk about your work and where people can get involved with your work, or where you can help people out, and your book, and then about actually helping people that have illnesses, and let's talk about all that.
Okay, sounds great. People can get in touch with me at patticonklin.com, and it's PattiConklin.com. And the book is in Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, local bookstores. It should be all over the place. I actually head to Seattle on Tuesday. I'll be doing a group cellular cleansing on the 13th. Speaking of Women of Wisdom's conference, giving a workshop on the 11th and 12th. And then a group cellular on the 13th, and one in San Jose on Valentine's Day, the 14th, and Los Angeles on the 15th. And then I'm going to fulfill a bucket list, and I'm actually going to take the train from Los Angeles to Chicago and just enjoy the scenery coming back. But we have all sorts of trainings coming up this spring, and certainly the Certified Associates training. We have about 40 in the world, and it's April 9th through the 15th here in Cartersville, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And there'll be a lot more programs coming on the web in terms of live webinars. And we actually just expanded into Russia, the 20 Russian federations. We just expanded the company into that area. So we're really continuing to grow and keep it under too much of a heavy workload. But really, people can call for half-hour appointments or hour appointments or private work or private training. Just had a person write today that wants me to come to Hong Kong to do 10 days of private training. And so, it's really, there's a lot of different things, but I think the most important thing, if people just need a little bit of help, every Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock East Coast time, is what we call a free live energy adjustment. It's one of my certified practitioners. They take turns doing it every Wednesday night. But people can type in and write to the practitioner about what's going on. And they do a half hour of color works or tone works. And the practitioner sends out energy, and it's free around the world. So we get a lot of people that do that.
Very, very interesting. Where can people get your book?
They can get the book at Amazon. They can get it online or Barnes & Noble's. But it's in quite a few bookstores around the country. Or if they want an autographed signed copy, they can go to my website and order it off the website and get one of those. But the book's going into second edition. That's making me very happy. It's doing very well. And then the next book will be out next fall. So
now, what's that book going to address?
That book is really going to go more into the healing begins now. Don't wish it, live it, and really taking hold of what's taking place inside your body. And it's going to be a lot more detailed in terms of how we think, the disease process, and taking personal responsibility for getting out of it. I mean, some of it is soul push. Some of it is the soul is meant to experience. But a lot of times it's really taking ownership and personal responsibility for how you're living your life and how you're thinking your thoughts. And so that's been fun to get started on the writing of it.
Do you think, Patti, that a lot of people, obviously depression can physically affect a person. I can say that firsthand. I can't say that in my life I've had a few things happen. I can't say that you hear of all different varying degrees. Some people that don't get out of bed for 2 months. and you know, when I used to hear that years ago, I would say, how the heck can a person stay in bed and not want to get out? Well, that can really happen, where you just want to try to tune the world away. But when you have those, when you have that heavy mental burden, if you will, obviously that it goes right to the body.
It really does. It really does. And in so many cases, it is something that's hidden, you know, emotionally or behaviorally, that just is adding up over time. But you do have those cases that, you know, it's a chemical imbalance. And, you know, I worked with a little boy about 6 months ago who had dissociative disorder. And he was trying to kill his 11-year-old twin brothers and trying to kill his parents in the middle of the night with knives, and just totally out of control. And I spent 5 evenings or 5 days, but more nights when he was sleeping, rebuilding his neurons. And I told the parents, you know, this is, who knows if this is going to work, but I'll give it a shot. And it was like pulling little gnats, little flies out of the air and putting them, you know, together in his brain. And the day I finished, he hasn't had a single episode since. Can handle his anger and express himself, and isn't on this killing spree. So, you know, our brain chemistry can be off, you know, due to various things. But I always kind of come back to, if we emotionally, behaviorally were in perfect condition, 100%, we could walk through a radiation field and not be affected. And, you know, our cells aren't that way anymore. I mean, if we look back and if we believe history, where people lived 500, 600 years old, you know, I think the cells were clean. And as we've gone down each generation, we've continued to pass on that cellular memory and get to the point where we're already born with cells that are congested from our genetics.
Right.
And when we go into depression, we still have to go find the underlying situation.
Very interesting. You want to take another call?
Sure.
All right. Caller, welcome to K-Talk.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Peter Franson, the one without sight. My question relates to actually wanting to develop that second sight, or sight substitution, what I call second sight, in tandem with actually developing the senses and grounding and developing the sensory awareness in reality here, in this reality, and how to do that. And that's where my question. That's
thank you for that question, because it's a great question, and I get it a lot. You know, I think that the first thing that has to be done is you have to start trusting yourself, and you can't be afraid of being wrong, and you can't be afraid of someone making fun of you, or you know, feeling embarrassed. You've got to trust your intuition. But beyond that, Peter, you really have to start clearing your own body, because the more your body is cleared, your own physical form and your cells are clear, the wider your frequency range becomes. And the wider your frequency range becomes, the more that second sight becomes very, very activated, and you can really tell what's going on. So it's a two-part. Trust yourself and continue to clean out your own emotional database. You know, if I get frustrated, even for a fraction of a minute, I have to sit down and think about what it is that I'm frustrated with, because I know that frustration for me is not something that's acceptable. So I'll deal with it in that second, and just take charge, and your second sight will continue to grow.
all right.
Okay?
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet Peter. He's legally blind, and he's trying to work through things. And I met him at a kind of a impromptu MUFON meeting here in Utah a month ago. Very, very nice gentleman, and nice to talk with.
Wonderful. And, you know, the other 4 sights, I mean, intuition, and Peter, if you're still listening, intuition is the fine-tuning of our 5 senses. That's all it is. It's not, for me, it's not a 6th sense. It's the fine-tuning of our 5 senses. So when we have something like blindness, the other four senses really take over. And that doesn't mean you can't see, even though you're legally blind. And so we really look at it, your primary and your secondary forms of communication is how you normally will intuit.
Gotcha. When somebody comes to you, Patti, and they're really, do you have to, obviously, number one, I would assume you have to physically be in the presence of somebody, but if there's something really wrong, does it make itself very apparent very quickly?
Yes, and I'm rarely with someone. I'm typically on Skype or by phone. I don't need to be in the same space with them. Okay. Yeah, it's no such thing as space and time, so they're right with me. But there's varying degrees. People will call the office and say, the doctors have given me 6 months to live, and I kind of see the soul as like sitting on the left shoulder in a rocking chair. And if there's a suitcase next to the rocking chair, I know it sounds bizarre, but if there's a suitcase sitting there, then I know the soul has decided that it's time to go, that their task is accomplished. And I'll be honest with them, and I'll just tell them, your doctors are correct. Now, how can I help you move out of fear? Because you are going to pass. And then sometimes, the suitcase isn't there, and I just say, I want to talk to your physician. If possible. If not, we'll start work right now, and we'll start working with color works and tone works to start changing their frequency, and also getting down to the emotional database of what created it to begin with. Gotcha. And that's always apparent. That's always right there.
What about people that pass very quickly, where something happens very traumatically? Is that something that you can sense is coming on?
It's only happened once. It's in my lifetime, and I was working with a group of honor students at a university, and the students came in. There were about 12 of them, and I knew that 4 of them were going to die in a car crash that night, and I also knew that it wasn't my place to stop it, and that was very clear to me, and I was devastated. Like, what do I do? And so I had each kid, we started talking about relationships and everything, and I had each student actually go call their parents and tell them how much they love them and what they love about them and what they've done for their life and so forth. And so when the tragedy happened later on that night, I just cried for days, but I felt okay that they had at least called their parents and had contact with them. But that's the rarity. Typically, I know when they're going to cross, but I typically, we talk first. But I typically don't have that kind of sight where I know somebody's going to pass, being totally healthy, that they're going to pass tragically. But it was clear that the souls were ready to go.
Gotcha. The souls and the stars were lining up.
That's right. That's right. And it doesn't matter how much we love life. The body has to have a way to shut down if the soul is on to its next program. And when that's, I think the soul and the divine spark come together, and the divine spark says, hey, did you get your work done? And the soul says, yep, and those two merge, and the body goes into its shedding process. And then if the work hasn't been done, then the soul goes back to its position within the body, and the divine spark goes back to it, and we continue on.
Kind of a checks and balances.
Exactly. And I think it's just really important to just not be afraid to go. I'm 57 now, and I'm, looking at that 62 kind of looming up, and my kids and I will talk about it. Well, you've got grandbabies now. Do you want to stay around? And I'm like, no. I'm psyched about the next adventure. I mean, I've had an incredible life here, but I'm looking forward to the next one. So if I'm given an option at 62, I think I'd like to go. And it doesn't have anything to do with anything else. It's just I love adventure. So
are you ready for the next one?
I'm kind of excited about what the next journey is going to be, and they just kind of roll their eyes, and And, they accept it because I am that kind of, I'm just a seeker. I just want to know more. And it's not taking workshops, and it's not listening to or reading books. It's just observing mankind. So, I've been to 63 countries now, and still a lot more that I want to see. And it's just observing how humanity interacts with each other and where that spiritual piece comes in and how that whole illness and disease process really manifests.
We've got about 50 seconds left. I'm going to ask you one quick question from our listeners, and I'm going to thank you for being here, and we're going to get you back on again because we got to keep up with these visits, so you can't leave just yet. But here is one question. It says, what is Patti's physical indicator trigger that comes just before her intuitions, or is there one at all?
There's not one. My intuition is nonstop. Okay. It's an open doorway.
It's always on.
Always on.
It's always on.
Yeah.
Patti, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. Again, give out your website so our listeners can hear.
Wonderful. PattiConklin.com, PattiConklin.com. And thank you so much for having me. It was great. Look forward to seeing you again.
We'll do this again real soon. Take care, Patti. Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Good night.
All right,
Bye-bye.
you too. Bye-bye.